food is most likely to be the commodity which almost entirely depends on ecosystem functioning and therefore biodiversity. We can synthesize, and we increasingly do so, materials for our clothing and construction and medicines, diminishing our dependence on organic biomass. But we are no way near to synthesizing all of our food at the required scope, and may never be there. As for the much discussed cellular foods, that is food grown indoors in bioreactors, we mustn't forget that the growing substrate and nutrients mostly still come from land and sea and living creatures therein. Since we always have been sourcing our food from organisms of other species, we have always been dependent on their availability, abundance, and variety. Biodiversity of certain types of ecosystems has become a foundation of developing agriculture in the first place, some 10,000 years ago. It is through the trial and error of domesticating a multitude of plants and animals that our modern agriculture-based civilization could evolve. Agricultural and food biodiversity includes all components of biological diversity of relevance to agriculture and other food. Genetic and species diversity encompasses crops, but also wild plants harvested for food, trees and bushes on farms and rangeland, grown medicinal plants and fiber plants. Similarly, animal genetic resources include domesticated breeds, but also wild animals hunted for food, wild and farmed fish and other species. In the narrow definition, this is what agricultural and food biodiversity is. However, there is an even larger scale of highly relevant biodiversity which we can call associated biodiversity. It is vast and complex, and its importance is still poorly understood and often little valued. It includes all species interacting with crops and domesticated animals, pollinators, predators, competitors, pests, pathogens, etc. Some of them are essential for production, and some have adverse effects on yields. Among these are also species evolved into processes vital for agricultural production, such as soil formation and water purification. Much of it is from the realms of microbes and fungi. Their role is more indirect, but just as vital. Finally, there are numerous species that do not have an appreciative effect on production, but that are in some ways evolved to become dependent on agricultural landscape. Examples include all of those birds and butterflies, plants outside of fields that make agricultural countryside vibrant with life, a place of natural beauty and joy to live. Not surprisingly, in Europe, we call some agricultural regions high nature value farmland due to their exceptional levels of biodiversity that can coexist with food production. You can explore their diversity for yourself from this site. You will recall that fairly recently we started calling biodiversity-dependent processes vital for supporting human well-being ecosystem services. Some services are obvious direct benefits, such as food from fields, forests, and seas, and some are processes that are only indirectly make food possible, such as much popularized pollination. Some are even less obvious. For example, genetic diversity is a fundamental source for allowing species to adapt to changing environments, and it is an immense source of novel characteristics of organisms, potentially addressing our future needs, of which we are not even aware today. Take time for yourself to ponder also social, cultural, and economic dimensions associated with growing and consuming a variety of food. Think back on the diets of your grandparents. Have the diet of your generation become more or less diverse, and in what ways? Can the access to food diversity be harnessed for healthier and more enjoyable diets? And do not forget that for many people globally, food does not come from a supermarket shelf in a constant variety independent of the time of the year. What implications does the diversity of wild species or crops have on food security in that context? Finally, have you noticed changes in food shelves during the recent disruptions of global trade imposed by COVID epidemics? What does it tell us about resilience of food systems that became regionally and continentally more and more specialized, when one region, one country, and even one continent focusing on growing an ever smaller variety of food. These are just a few questions that can guide our thinking from obvious usefulness of agricultural biodiversity to its broader values, such as food security, healthy diets, cultural experiences, heritage, future needs of specific genes that are more hidden from our daily experiences. Previously, the course touched upon biodiversity loss. This affects not only wildlife, such as pandas, whales, and remote areas such as tropical forests. This loss is happening right under our eyes, also in agriculture-dominated countryside. Especially well, we documented a continuous loss of the genetic diversity of crops and breeds. According to FAO, over 90% of crop varieties have disappeared from active use, and half of the breeds of domesticated animals have been lost. Every single of the world's main fishing grounds are now being fished at or above their sustainable limits, which many fish populations effectively becoming extinct. This means that their size is so small that fishing is impossible or uneconomic. The loss of forest cover, coastal wetlands, other wild uncultivated areas leads to the erosion of genetic diversity of species used for food, such as species harvested from the wild, but also wild relatives of crops. Today, just 3 plants, rice, maize, and wheat, contribute nearly 60% of calories and proteins obtained by humans from the plants. So this erosion of food sources increasingly becomes a threat to the very resilience of the human food production and often leads to unhealthy diets. Of the biodiversity supporting production, we have exceptionally well documented the plight of pollinators, domesticated bees and wild. However, we still know disconcertingly little of the trends in diversity of many more organisms relevant or potentially relevant for food production. In some countries, dramatic losses among species associated with farmland have been documented, often due to efforts of thousands of volunteers. For example, nearly a third of species of grasshoppers and crickets and a third of butterflies are threatened in the European Union, mainly because they are affected by agriculture. An estimated 37 million of individuals of a commonest farmland bird, skylark, on the picture here, have been lost from the countryside. A state of birds on farmland in such countries as the UK, France, the Netherlands became so grave that scientists proposed to call this phenomenon a second silent spring, in reference to a famous book of Rachel Carson, who was the first to link the use of pesticides in agriculture to the massive die-off of birds in the United States in the 60s. Will the losses of such birds as sparrows and swallows affect our food security, you can rightly ask? Most probably not. But the decline of one's common species is a tip of the iceberg of losses among many taxa. We can count birds easily, even if they might be irrelevant for production of food. But we have problems in monitoring declines in species groups that are, on one hand, provide birds with food, and on the other, sustain, for example, pest control. This way, a decline in birds may be a signal of warning of the overall biodiversity loss and its potential implications for important functions in agricultural production. But then again, even if considerable part of biodiversity of the planet is not important for food production, does this necessarily mean it is not important?